Joining me now to discuss the state of consumers and the biggest concerns facing them, we've got Sveta Kalinska, consulting founder and CEO of Rela Global. Sveta, thank you so much for joining us today. All right, so I have your list of the top concerns facing consumers right now, and this seems important, obviously, as we head towards the holiday season. One of them surprised me, and that's tariffs, right? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. So I analyze consumers and I do what marketers call consumer behavior modeling. So basing conversations of consumers, we base strategies for basically how brands can discuss and approach those with customers. Over the last year and over the last basically 2025, the top concern for U.S. consumers, both English and Spanish speaking, have actually been tariffs. And tariffs have been seen through the wallet first lens by consumers. So it's been very interesting to monitor that this year alone we have 25 million discussions from U.S. consumers on the topic of tariffs. And listen to this, the interesting part is that almost 40% of all mentions around tariffs by consumers are negative. In addition to that, that basically makes a ratio of 16 to 1 negative to positive. So anytime a consumer hears the word tariff, they instantly associate it with something very negative. 3 out of every 3 posts, basically one post is directly related to President Trump. And that ties back very closely to how the discussion among consumers is seen around tariffs.
With that conversation around tariffs, are you noticing any conversations around shifts in buying patterns as a result of that? Are consumers having to make choices? Because we've heard this on earnings calls from some of these consumer-facing companies that it's a more choiceful consumer, and I wonder if that is code for they're having to just pick the needs and kind of pull back on the wants.
Totally. I've seen appliances and furniture among U.S. consumers as items that they've basically put on hold. Now, the interesting part here is that among Spanish-speaking U.S. consumers, those look very different. So
interesting.
When it comes to tariffs, Spanish-speaking consumers have discussed soy, beef, and sugar at 15% of all discussions as top concern when it comes to tariffs. And the interesting part is that these consumers, the U.S. Spanish-speaking consumers, have seen the political tensions almost as a diplomatic language that this White House has basically used to cover the topic of tariffs.
The beef part is interesting to me because I was at the grocery store. I was trying to decide on my groceries, and I was trying to decide if I was going to splurge on steak, and it was so expensive that I was like, nah, we won't be having steak. This week we'll stick with chicken and fish and beans and whatnot. Let me ask you, with consumers, okay, so we're getting towards the, a big part of the year for, consumer-facing companies, right? The holiday shopping season, it's a crucial time period. Are you expecting, given the trends that you're seeing for consumer mentions, are you expecting any kind of pullback, or is Christmas and the holiday season still on?
Oh, I love that question because the holidays are coming up and I think everyone's gearing up for that. So I'll start off again maybe with the more negative and then I'll move on to the positive.
Okay.
So from negative end, inflation was secondary concern for U.S. consumers. Again, I analyzed actually data from the last 30 days, and when it came to the discussions around inflation, once again, we did see, sure, groceries and appliances and other topics, but actually top concern for the consumer related to inflation was medical care, medical health care costs, premiums, and also medical devices. And again, that so closely ties with tariffs and that tariff discussion. But let's move on to something happy and something positive. So when I looked at the data that consumers had shared online in the last month around holidays and basically the positive outlook, I did see actually the mobility category had a lot of positive discussions. And that is because consumers talked about purchasing vehicles literally just in the last 30 days. The discussions about purchasing a vehicle were up 12% since last month. So that tells us that going into the holidays, consumers are basically ready to spend a higher amount than they normally would have in the prior part of the year. And that is very much probably going to be focused in that mobility space. So anything that has to do with vehicles and electronics.
It would be interesting to see, though, if I know your data shows some smarter financial habits, but it would be interesting to see if there will be an increase in debt just to finance essentially the holidays, especially given the recent credit card numbers that we've seen about, the rise in consumer debt, both credit cards and auto loans. I want to go to one point that you notice, and this is related to the labor market, right? And a big concern that's coming up there. We don't have a lot of recent data on the labor market because of the economic data blackout, but you have some data about how much younger adults are paying attention to AI. What are the trends here?
Thank you for the question. I was hoping that you asked me that. So everything is very much tied together. And as you mentioned, the job report is actually 9 days late. So we're still expecting the most current job report end of the week. I analyzed what consumers mentioned when it came to AI and job and employment. And what I saw is actually that it goes by the order of AI and unemployment. So Gen Z and millennial were very vocal on social media, and over 12% of all discussions came from Gen Z and millennials who talked about how AI is actually ruining their career, if you think about it. They've mentioned that any company that's issued a statement about going agentic or anything related to artificial intelligence, they actually now see that brand eroding. And the public trust that they have in that company is just basically going down the drain.
Yeah.
So I've seen that among millennials, and the unemployment rate in general as a topic was the third most discussed concern by U.S. consumers, both, again, English and Spanish speaking. And that has actually been downward trending since the beginning of the year. So I think when it comes to the job report that we expect later this week,
I don't think that's going to come this week.
I agree.
I think, I know you're saying you expect it later this week. They're going to put out CPI because the Labor Department is reopening for, to come up with those numbers. But that's about setting the cost of living, right? So they, want to make sure that those who are on Social Security get that kind of adjustment. But just because the Labor Department is coming back, unless the government shutdown ends, and look, we're approaching, it was well over 2 weeks now without that jobs report. So I appreciate your optimism. I like the optimistic points, and I do tend to be an optimist, but being a realist in this situation, I don't know that we're going to get that this week.
I would have to say I agree, but that's why I'm here, and I analyze what consumers thought about it. So
all right. No, I appreciate the bright spots that you brought as well. That's Sveta Kolenska, CEO and a founder of Rela Consulting.